Dr. Salla covers the exopolitical background to current world events. He believes we are witnessing a planetary show to expose and eliminate the deep state. Recorded in April 2023, this information is important and worthy of a second look.
Welcome, aloha, howdy all, g'day. Glad you could join me today. I thought I would start off with giving you a roundup, an exopolitical assessment of what's going on around the world. I know all of you are watching and trying to make sense of it all because things look pretty bad. I know there's a lot of doom and gloom out there, a lot of people predicting the very worst, and we are being told that things may be getting very bad very soon and may be like that for some time. And I think there is a reason for that, and I think also there's a lot of optimistic about what's going on, that this is just an awakening period. What I want to do is bring your attention to some of the things that I've covered in previous webinars. So I'll just give you a little bit of a background, about 20 minutes or so, on what's happened and why what we are witnessing around the world at the moment is not really something that you watching this need to be concerned about. It's not something that you should panic over. Whereas those that haven't yet gone through the red pill process, this is all about them. This is really about those that haven't been red pilled, because you that are watching this, you've been through the red pill process, and I'm sure many of you maybe recall your own red pilling. I certainly remember mine. I mean, I remember vividly back in 1999. I was having a conversation with a fellow assistant professor at American University. There were three of us in this conversation, and I remember very clearly this professor from Palestine. He was saying that to understand the Palestinian problem, you needed to consult the alternative media. And I was incredulous. What is the alternative media? What's that? So this is back in 1999. I had never heard about the alternative media. And I was convinced at that time that the reporters with the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN, mainstream media outfits like BBC, that these were the very best, giving you kind of like analyses from the front lines of whatever problem. And so I just did not believe him when he said that you needed to consult the alternative media. And I had to go through my red pill process. And up until that time, I was impervious to all arguments from anyone that there was such a thing as an alternative media that could give you sound analyses for what's going on around the world. I was convinced, like many of my colleagues in university that are brought up on a diet of mainstream media, along with peer-reviewed academic journals and university publishers putting out books, texts, and so forth, that we were getting the most accurate, expert information. And my red pill process began in 2001 with the Disclosure Project press conference that Stephen Greer organized, and that opened my eyes to a UFO cover-up. But that was just the beginning for me. Later on, I had to learn things such as the involvement of the CIA in drug running. I didn't believe that the CIA was involved in drug running back in 2001. I thought, well, yes, there's a cover-up of UFOs. The extraterrestrial presence is being hidden from us. But the CIA involved in drug running? No way. No way. That 2001. So I had to go through a process. And I remember reading people like Michael Ruppelt. Many of you probably remember Michael Ruppelt and his book, and he was a former Los Angeles detective. And then you had the reports from the Dark Alliance, Gary Webb, talking about the CIA involvement in drug running, and there were a lot of information started coming out. And then I realized that, wow, yeah, the CIA is involved in drug running. So that was a process. And I think we need to look around us today. people who have not been through the red pill process, they are looking at the stuff that's coming across in the mainstream media as the gospel truth. They take it as accurate, that these are the best and most knowledgeable people reporting on these events, whatever field you're talking about, the mainstream media, Washington Post, New York Times, CNN, NBC, or BBC, these are reporting the gospel truth for a lot of people that haven't been red pilled. But thankfully, after what has happened during the last few years with the COVID pandemic, I mean, the COVID pandemic, that red pilled a lot of people that just did not believe that there was such a thing as a conspiracy theory, or that there was a government conspiracy involving these secret groups behind the scenes pulling the strings or pulling the levers of power and manipulating the public opinion. And it was what we saw with the COVID and the lockdowns that red pilled a lot of people. And there's a lot of medical doctors that have been recently red pilled, and the red pilling is a part of a process. As I experienced, and maybe those of you that have gone through a similar process, you might remember the thing that first red pilled you, and that opens you up. That opens you up to more sources of information, and so then you've got more sources of information giving you another perspective on events around the world, and that red pill process just continued. So I think what we are witnessing is a lot of people that are going through the red pill process, and those that are from the conservative side of politics in the United States. In other countries, we're probably talking about people that were against the COVID lockdowns, that were against the masks and the vaccines, all those people that were against that and in their countries, and saw that the majority were in favour of that. I think of my home country of Australia, especially in Melbourne, where I was seeing the police brutally beat up protesters in Melbourne. It was unbelievable to see this. Of all the cities in the world, that this could happen in Melbourne, that the police brutality was amazing. And a lot of people saw that, and on the one hand, the mainstream media was spinning it all as, well, these violent protesters that are out there doing all this kind of anti-vaccine, anti-COVID measures, they're irresponsible. And so a lot of people bought into that propaganda, but there was a steady growth in those that were red-pilled because of that joined the protests and saw the police brutality. And I think the same thing is happening around the world. So there's more people getting red-pilled. I think when we bring in the exopolitical factor, the important thing to keep in mind is that the red pilling process takes time. And while those on the conservative political right, a lot of them have been red pilled, many on the political left are still buying into the mainstream propaganda. So more things need to happen. And I think that what we're witnessing right now is a big show, and it's designed to red pill those on the political left. So those of you on the right, I don't think you need to look at what's happening and kind of like take a step back and think, okay, this is not really meant for me. These kind of like things that we are seeing that are worrying a lot of people, like the prospect of a kind of like a nuclear war, whether it's a nuclear war over Ukraine, whether it's a nuclear war over Taiwan and China, or an economic collapse, the financial collapse, the US dollar suddenly losing all value, or another health crisis. And then now they're saying, well, monkeypox is going to be the next big health crisis, and in May we're going to see them, the deep state, roll out their next big pandemic psyop, or it could be a false flag alien invasion. All of these possibilities are there, but I think those of us that have been through the red pilling process, we need to kind of take a step back and not get too disturbed about this, because I think the goal is not that we are going to really experience these things to their full effect. I think we're going to witness something that could be one or several of these scenarios playing out, and the goal is to wake up those on the political left. And so, why do I think it's a big show? Okay, well, this is where we've got to go to the Trump presidency. 2017, Donald Trump became president. 2020, 2021, you had everything play out in terms of the election steal. And I think it was transparently interference in the 2020 election, to the extent that those within the political and military establishment looked at all of the data and said, yes, this was major electoral interference. Of course, everyone knows what happened after the election, and with Trump and his calls that the Electoral College shouldn't approve Biden. And so we know all of that. We know the controversy January 6th. But the background of that was that the Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, was supposed to deliver a report to Congress in December. And that was authorized by an executive order, a report on whether or not the 2020 election was interfered with in any way. Was there any foreign election interference? Now, that report was never delivered. It was never delivered because John Ratcliffe was stonewalled by the intelligence agencies. The CIA and the other alphabet agencies did not deliver the report that showed that there was foreign election interference until after the Electoral College voted to approve Biden administration. So what that meant was that those within the military establishment that were looking at this foreign election interference, they had to make a decision. Do we roll out the troops? Do we take over the country and say there was foreign election interference, and whether it was the Vatican, whether it was the Fourth Reich Germans, whether it was China, or a combination, or the Illuminati, the Freemasons, there was foreign election interference, and so this election was null and void. Is null and void, and I think they did their scenarios. They looked at all the possible scenarios of going forward and militarily intervening and saying that the election was interfered with. Trump actually won in a landslide, or they hold new elections, whatever it was. But they made a decision that the election results would not be overturned through military intervention. And I think they made the decision not to do that because if they did so, they realized that the deep state would unleash the forces of hell in the United States, and the United States would plunge into a brutal civil war where you would have the CIA, the FBI, on one side, you'd have the US military. On the other side, with the conservatives, all the leftists would be with the FBI, with the CIA, and the deep state. And it would be a full-on civil war in the United States. And I think that the people within the military that were responsible for all of this decided, okay, we're not going to do that. And Trump, to his credit, decided, okay, I'm just going to step aside, let Biden come in. And what I think happened as a result of that was that there was a continuity of government emergency declared or implemented by US Northern Command, and that has been headed since the Trump administration by the same General Glenn Van Herk. He's in charge of NORAD and Northern Command, and he is the one that runs the continuity of government operation out of the Northern Command facilities. So that's where you get all of these alternative media reports talking about a continuity of government emergency being operated out of Cheyenne Mountain. I think that there's truth to that. Proving it is another thing. So that's one thing I want you to keep in mind, the continuity of government emergency, where you actually have the commanders of Northern Command and NORAD running this continuity of government emergency out of places like Cheyenne Mountain to prevent a civil war in the United States, and just kind of like make sure that the Biden administration doesn't do anything that would get the United States into a devastating nuclear war, and just allow the Biden administration to do its thing, because the Biden administration is a show, but it's totally a deep state operation where the deep state is using the Biden administration to kind of like fill its coffers with as much cash as it can through all of these, the Inflation Reduction Act and the stimulus acts, the war in Ukraine, all this money being poured out into all of these causes. That's going into the deep state coffers for them to be able to do their thing. So on the one hand, you have this continuity of government emergency. You have this other phenomenon, which I've talked about, which is the meetings that happened in space between the major nations, where you had on this base above Jupiter, the Ashtar Command base, you had a meeting, and I've talked about this at length. Elena Danan has talked about it at length. And at that meeting, it was decided that the solar system was going to be handed over back to humanity, and that an Earth alliance would be responsible for the solar system, because all the negative extraterrestrials were being run out of town. So they were being run out of town. That actually did happen. But the minions of the reptilians, the Orion Greys, the insectoids, they remain in power. They are the deep state. They still have a lot of power. And they're running the Biden show. Now, the thing about this exopolitical dynamic is that the agreement was reached whereby you would have a council of 6 major spacefaring nations that would be in charge of the entire solar system, and they would work with the Galactic Federation, the Ashtar Command, Andromeda Council, and the Cedars, and so forth. And those 6 nations, I've discussed this in my book, Galactic Federations, Councils, and Secret Space Programs. Elena has discussed it. Those 6 nations are the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, plus Japan. That was our best guess. The United States, France, Russia, China, United Kingdom, and Japan. Those are the 6 nations. And out of those 6 nations, the United States Space Command would be in charge of coordinating all of the major spacefaring nations for harmonizing them all into one voice. And so that's what happened. And how do we know that? Well, I've been talking about JP's missions to the space arcs. He's reported constantly that the United States is working with China. The Space Command is working with China. They're working with the Russians. They're working with the French. They're working with others as part of a multinational alliance to find out all of these ancient artifacts in our solar system, and to ensure that these are explored and dealt with in a responsible way to preclude any kind of planetary catastrophe. So all of the major nations are cooperating in space, and that's being headed by Space Command. And the general in charge of Space Command is General James Dickinson. Again, another general that was there during the Trump administration, and he's still there now. So Space Command is working with Northern Command to make sure this whole continuity of government thing runs without any major calamity. And what we are witnessing now is the deep state is trying to foment war between the United States and Russia in Ukraine. And this And why is it that Russia has not responded to the United States and NATO arming the Ukrainians and actually giving them operational information that they can use in the field against Russian forces, killing Russian soldiers? There have probably been, I think estimates are anywhere from 15 to 25,000 Russian soldiers that have been killed and many more injured because of this. Why has Russia not said that, okay, we're in a state of war in Ukraine, NATO is fighting on behalf of Ukraine, using it as in a proxy war, and so we are in a state of war with NATO. Now, if Russia did that, we would be in a hot third world war with NATO and against Russia. But Putin, President Putin, understands that this is a deep state operation, that Ukraine is a deep state operation, that the United States and Russia are really cooperating behind the scenes via Space Command, via Northern Command and NORAD. They're cooperating behind the scenes to make sure that things remain at a certain level without going at a point where you would actually have nuclear missiles being sent off. So Northern Command, Space Command are working with Putin to make sure that things don't get out of hand, which is why Putin has not declared a state of war in Ukraine. He continues to call it a special military operation, because if he said that Russia is in a state of war in Ukraine, by international law, he would then be kind of compelled to declare that those NATO countries that are aiding and abetting Ukraine are also in a state of war with Russia. That would lead to the Third World War, hot Third World War. So Russia is continuing to call this a special military operation because behind the scenes, the Russians and the Chinese and the United States are cooperating under this framework that was agreed to in the Jupiter Accords at the Ashtar Command facility. And because there's a big picture unfolding, which is that humanity is now in control of our solar system. And that if we do not behave responsibly, then the Draco reptilians and the Orion Greys will come back in and take over control, because they'll say, look how disunited and how chaotic the humans are. They can't manage their own planet. So how can they manage the solar system? So what's happening on Earth is a show. It's a political show designed to wake up Democrats, liberal progressives, those that are brainwashed by the deep state controlled mainstream media. It's all a show, because behind the scenes, at the bigger exopolitical picture, the adults are making sure that things don't get out of hand. Now, this is where now we get to look at some of the things that are happening that are designed to red pill the public. You know, one of the big developments in the United States, of course, is that Robert Kennedy Jr. has entered the presidential election. He's declared his candidacy. Now, that's a big thing. Robert Kennedy Jr. is working with the Earth Alliance, and his job is to wake up Democrats, and he's doing it in a big way. He is waking people up through his research, exposing Anthony Fauci. So he's doing a great job in waking them up. Now, as a mainstream, now as a presidential candidate, a lot more people are going to be paying attention to his anti-vaccine views. So they're going to get red-pilled that they were scammed for 3 years by the whole COVID vaccine drama or show, that was a show. The other thing is now Kennedy is starting to speak out about what's happening in Russia, in Ukraine. He's saying that what the mainstream media has been telling people about Ukraine is a lie. It's fake. That the Ukrainians are losing terribly there. If you've been following the mainstream media, New York Times, Washington Post, the Russians are on the ropes. They're just about to go down. Once the Ukrainians get their spring offensive off the ground, that'll be it for Putin. They'll march all the way to Crimea and Moscow next. That's all propaganda. None of it is true. It's the opposite. And the thing is, Kennedy is starting to expose that. He's just given recently an interview where he began to expose that is what's going on. So you have Kennedy, red-pilling Democrats in the United States revealing the truth. In Europe, you have massive anti-war protests. People are against this war in Ukraine. And every day, more and more people are saying, why are we doing this? Why are we sanctioning Russia? Why are we fueling the war in Ukraine? Why are we sending Ukrainians military equipment and ammunition and even special forces? Why are we doing all these things? So more and more people are against the war in Europe. And so Europeans are waking up. The anti-war movement in Europe is is growing quite rapidly. So now this takes us to the news about UFOs. Well, as we know, the UFO shootdowns recently. All of a sudden in the United States, in February, you had those 4 UFOs that were shot down. One was a Chinese weather balloon, so that probably doesn't count. But 3 were like metallic orbs, reported to be metallic orbs. Why all of a sudden are they shooting down these UFOs? Previously, they were just saying that these were no national security threat. Why are they shooting them down? Why all of a sudden are mainstream news reports commenting on motherships releasing UFO probes? Now, there was a paper recently written by the director of the new All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, along with Professor Avi Loeb from Harvard University. They wrote a paper, and in that paper they talk about an alien mothership arriving in our solar system and releasing probes. So this is the explanation that is being pushed out now by the mainstream media. So they're now getting us to look at these UFOs not only as a threat, because that's the way the UFO phenomenon has been depicted by the mainstream media, as a threat. They were shot down. Prior to the 3 UFOs that were shot down, you had news reports about UFOs buzzing military installations, and that this was a national security threat. So they had to create this new All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. Congress is now requesting periodic or annual reports, and it's all framed around the UFOs being a threat. Now they've ratcheted it up a little bit, and now they're saying, well, these UFOs, these probes are being released from a mothership. Now, Sean Kirkpatrick, he is as deep state as you come. Avi Loeb, he has a very interesting connection to Israel's military intelligence community, because he was a former member of the Talpiot, which is a program designed to recruit talented Israeli scientists for doing military intelligence related work. So they are putting out this information that the UFOs are a threat and that they are coming from a mothership. Now, why is that? Well, this is where we get into another aspect of the unfolding dynamic around us, is that, according to my source JP, the arcs, the space arcs, are activating, that they are releasing probes looking for their crews. They're releasing probes, and these probes are going out and people are seeing them. And the military is freaking out, trying to find out, what are the probes for? What are they trying to do? And also, the motherships that are activating the space arcs are approaching the Earth. So you've got motherships from the Cedars, from the other positive extraterrestrial groups that are approaching the Earth, and they're releasing their own craft. They're monitoring the situation. You've got the space arcs releasing probes. And so why are they doing that? Why are they releasing probes? Why are they monitoring the situation? Because as far as the extraterrestrials are concerned, the Earth is going through something really profound. It's going through this process where you have a small, very small group of humans, deep state, and their assets in every major nation, controlling banking institutions, controlling secret societies, controlling the major media, that they are trying to contrive a global catastrophe while the Earth Alliance and the positive militaries are all collaborating to stop anything really bad happening, and just using the deep state false flag attempts or their actions kind of like to further red pill the rest of the population that are still believing what they read in the New York Times and the Washington Post. So I think that what we're having right now in the United States is you have the Biden administration trying to create a third world war in Ukraine using nuclear weapons, but they've failed. Putin hasn't escalated things. He hasn't declared a state of war. He hasn't started to attack Poland and Lithuania that are arming and abetting the Ukrainians, sending in special forces and so forth. He didn't react to the Nord Stream pipeline being stopped. Because behind the scenes, while the Biden administration is clearly targeting Russia, Putin is talking to the Earth. Putin's military people and Putin himself is talking to the Earth Alliance. They're talking to the head of Space Command. They're talking to the head of Northern Command. And they're saying, "Don't worry, we've got it under control. Nothing really bad is going to happen." So it's a show. Same thing is happening in China. This whole thing with Taiwan, Biden administration is now turning its attention to Taiwan to try and create a war in Taiwan. But the Taiwanese aren't going to. Taiwan does have deep state influence, very powerful deep state influence there. But President Xi of China isn't going to be fooled into launching an invasion of Taiwan, because that's what the deep state wants. They want China to launch an invasion of Taiwan. So they're trying to incentivize or provoke President Xi to attack China because they want a third world war, preferably one that goes nuclear really quickly. That's what the deep state is trying to do. But the Chinese, President Xi isn't going to fall for the trap because he's working with Space Command as well. They know this because there's a big picture involved. It's not just a matter of the Earth and who controls territorial resources on Earth and space arcs. That is not really the main game here. It's our whole solar system. Who controls the solar system? If humanity doesn't get its act together, and the Galactic Federation and the Star Command have told the Space Command and the Earth Alliance have said, look, if you guys are not able to step up and take control of your solar system, we can only help you for a certain amount of time. The Draconians, the Orions, they're going to come back. If you're not ready, if you're not united, and you cannot defend your solar system, you'll be easy picking for these guys. So they know that. So what we're witnessing right now around the planet, what you're reading in the mainstream media, it's just a show to wake up the sleeping political lefties, the liberal progressives, those that read the Huffington Post or read Move On and the New York Times and believe that propaganda. Everything that we're witnessing is being, even though the deep state is genuinely trying to create chaos and deploying all its assets, these are being nullified. So what's next? Well, the deep state is going to try something involving UFOs. And I think it's going to be an attempt to bring about this false flag alien invasion. Now, I just did an interview with John D'Souza. That'll come out next week. And he goes through his data for why he thinks there's going to be a false flag alien attempt, where you're going to have the deep state rolling out Project Bluebeam. They're going to use genuine assets, genuine space assets and aerospace vehicles, along with holographic technologies to make it look like, 10 spacecraft that they have up there is a fleet of 1,000. They're going to do things to make it look like these dirigible aerospace platforms that can stay afloat for 2-3 weeks or a couple of months. David Wilcock did a webinar on this, I think it was a year and a half ago, where he presented a lot of data. It was very good on these dirigibles that can stay afloat for several weeks or months. And that this was part of what he thought, and I think he's correct, that this was part of what they were probably going to try and do in terms of some sort of false flag event in the future. And I think that's exactly what John D'Souza was getting at, that these kinds of assets that the deep state has been developing behind the scenes are going to be deployed along with holographic technologies to make it look like the Earth is really under attack. So that'll be part of the show too, if that happens. So I think at the end of the day, what I want to kind of like say to you is that don't get worried. Don't fall into some depression or pessimism that we're all screwed, that things are going to fall apart. This is all designed for a purpose, to wake up those that are still asleep, to reach a critical mass when then the truth can be revealed. A lot of the things that I've been saying, that can be revealed and people will accept it and will not just things degenerate into chaos. So that's the kind of intro. I think that sets the scene for the exopolitical picture, that hopefully you can better understand what is going on, and that helps you frame some questions for this webinar. So again, I want to thank my team. Thank you for being a part of this. I'm very glad we all joined this mission, this Earth mission together, and we really have exciting times ahead, and so I look forward to being part of that with you. So thank you and aloha.
You have been listening to Exopolitics today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.